So my name is Dinsmore-Tuli, and I am delighted to be interviewing Caroline Shola Arewa, author of Opening to Spirit and many other wonderful books about the roots of yoga. I'm going to introduce her to you now. I'm doing this on behalf of the Yoni Shakti, the movement campaign. The movement is to eradicate the abuse of women in yoga and to reclaim yoga as a tool for freedom and for justice and for healing. And I honestly believe that Shola's work is all about this. She's been doing this work for some time. I regard her as an elder, an inspiration, and yeah, over to you. I'm going to invite Shola to speak about Opening to Spirit and about the roots of yoga. How did you come to write this amazing book? Like, I still got my copy here. This is my 1998 copy of what I think was your first book. Is that right?
That is the original. You've got the original book there from 1998, and let's just see. This is a 20-year anniversary edition.
Oh.
And that's from last year. So this book's been around for 21 years, and it's actually lovely to see a kind of peak of interest in it again. During COVID. I don't know if you found that as well with Yoni Shakti, that people were just wanting to be reading and learning and studying these things. So Opening to Spirit actually took me 7 years to write. And as a yoga teacher, so I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a psychologist, a therapist, and a trainer. And so quite often when I was training people about whether it's therapy or different aspects of our well-being, I need to say a little bit about the history. And so as I was doing that, I was feeling that the history always started in Greece. Whether it was anatomy and physiology that I was teaching or anything, the history seemed to go back that far and then stop. And so as a African woman, it was a little bit like I was kind of somehow cut out of this history. So whether it was something like touch and body therapy and energy work and massage, which we know must go back to the very beginning of time. If it was working with herbs, it can't start in Greece. It has to start when people first discovered plants and the properties of plants. And the same with yoga. Much of yoga is based on that kind of observation of nature, whether it's the elements or whether it's the animals or whether it's our relationship to nature itself. So again, that can't start kind of some way down. It is more likely to start at the very beginning of humankind. And so I think what I needed to do was look at kind of really reassess that history and look at that history and see potentially where I and people that look like me were written out of that history and just really put it back. So just kind of reclaim that history. Essentially, I needed to do that for myself because, you know, this has been a life's work for me. I've been a yoga teacher for 35 years and nobody can go through that amount of time and somehow not be in there, not see themselves reflected. And so that is what I really corrected.
Yeah. And I feel that when because you're writing about the Egyptian and West African, you're writing about Babylonian, the whole histories of all these different goddesses, energy systems. And what I sensed as a yoga practitioner was a completeness. You are opening up to empower everybody to see themselves and to claim the practice that nourishes them. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about, because when you talk about the chakras, you're talking about specific different energy systems, but you also talk a lot about the ancient goddesses. And I found that deeply inspiring because it took it into a real like earth-rooted and matrilineal understanding of some of the goddesses. I wondered if you could speak a bit about that.
Sometimes people see yoga as a really kind of masculine practice and coming from men. And it's so interesting for me because I don't see yoga like that at all. When we really go back and look at the history of yoga, like anything, the history of humans, we're going to find the feminine. We're going to find the female. We're going to find women. We're going to find the womb. We're going to find that kind of creative force. And again, when we look at that, it's going to take us back to the beginning of time. It's going to take us back to the first womb, if you like, the womb of people, the womb of the whole planet itself, where humans started, which is in Mother Africa. And so for me, I never see yoga as being devoid of the feminine, actually quite the opposite. So the feminine is a massive part. And I think any research, obviously you've done lots of work on that yourself, but any research on that, we're going to find the divine feminine. And if we don't find it, there's something wrong with your research. I don't know if I answered your question, or I need to answer that again.
No, I think that really helps. And how did you find, I mean, because the book's been around for 21 years, and as somebody who was inspired by it at the beginning, I wondered how some of the kind of commercial yoga entities and the studios, how does your work sit within that kind of standard commercial yoga world?
Wow. Well, it's kind of interesting. I mean, many people use it on their teacher trainings because they want people to have that kind of broader understanding. But I guess it's like anything, you know, there's much of yoga that's not fully appreciated in the kind of modern day yoga. So people will still be standing on their head and putting their feet behind their neck and all of those things, without necessarily really understanding any of the philosophy or the kind of energetic disciplines or many of the practices of yoga. And so my book would just fall in there with some of the depths of yoga that people simply don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you see yoga, like the yoga that you've experienced yourself as a teacher, as a practitioner, how does it relate to freedom and to empowerment in the broadest sense?
Yeah, well, and that's a great question, because I think when we really look at what yoga is about, and I think some of this is what may have been lost, you know, yoga essentially is about liberation. You know, it's a practice of liberation. It's not a practice of kind of connecting deeper to, you know, the limited self, but it's about being able to go beyond that. And as a psychologist, I guess I see it as kind of transcend and include. So I do think yoga has a place for supporting us to kind of connect more deeply with self, and to have us kind of embody and ground who we are in this incarnation, walking on the planet at this time. But I also think it really supports us to go beyond that. In fact, one of the things that I say is moving from embodiment to enlightenment. And so for me, that is about really having the ability to come deeply into the body and to be here, to be present, to really experience the physical. And in actual fact, I would say that that is the root chakra, and that is the feminine. So whereas there can be more of a kind of sense that what we need to do energy-wise and chakra-wise is to elevate energy upwards, so kind of away from the root and up to the crown, and the crown is the real kind of key aim. I think one of the things that I talk about in Opening to Spirit that's a little different, I don't think I personally had found that anywhere, was one of the things that I do is I equate the root chakra and the feminine as equal to the crown chakra and the kind of masculine energy, if you want to call it that. So I see them both with equal importance. One of the things I also talk about is you cannot get out of your body, i.e. enlightenment. You can't get out of your body if you're not in it. And so it's really about involution and evolution. It's about coming home into the physical, into the body, and grounding spirit in our experience every day.
And I have to say that honouring of the root was one of the things that really inspired me with, you know, from your work, that I feel that I've in lots of ways really kind of informed what I was trying to do with Yoni Shakti, which is to say, actually, if we're fully embodied and honoring this earth and rooted connection, that is part of a kind of homecoming. It's actually, you know, trying to people get literally out of their bodies doesn't actually serve any kind of freedom at all. I mean, it seemed like there was no freedom in that. And I wondered if you'd speak. You bring in a lot of the Yoruba creation myths and the gods and the goddesses in a sense of reconnection. You said it was work you needed to do to yourself for reconnecting to ancestral roots. Could you speak a bit more about that in terms of how yoga in its embodiment aspect is a way for us all actually to reconnect ancestrally, you know, the freedom of that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'd be kind of interested to know what your experience of this has been as well, Uma. So for myself, writing Opening to Spirit, and I've just said it took me 7 years to write. After it was finished and people were reading it, lots of people would say to me, oh, wow, that's an amazing book. You must have done so much research. There's so much in it. And at first I was thinking, oh, did I? Was that lots of research? And the reason that I was kind of a little thrown by that was much of what I share in the book was really from doing the practice. You know, from really kind of aligning and just getting down and doing the practice consistently for years. And what I found as a result of doing that was it kind of tapped me into something else. It connected me with something, so that in terms of the book, anything that I kind of needed for that book, it was as if it was right there in front of me. It was if it's called Opening to Spirit, and it was literally like an opening to spirit. So I never felt it a kind of chore. It didn't feel kind of challenging or difficult in any way. And I think it's also that's kind of in the book, if that makes sense. Yeah. Just that experience of kind of, you know, realigning. So when we realign, we come back to this knowledge. You know, we have this greater understanding of, you know, everything really, of what you know, what was, what is, and what shall be.
Yeah. And that deep freedom and knowledge seems to me available through our practices of yoga. And I mean, I have a specific interest in the practice of yoga nidra. And one of the things I enjoy about your work is that with the journaling and the connection through yoga, you have an emphasis on things like dream journals and connecting with your ancestral links through our dream world. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about that. I mean, I see that as, I access that through yoga nidra. I don't know if you wanted to speak about how that is in your work with the freedom that we get through really respecting our dreams.
Yeah, it's interesting, because again, that's what I'm thinking of in terms of going beyond, you know, being able to kind of receive, so that it is about liberation. It's not necessarily even about an intellectual knowing, but it's what's at the other side of that. When we let go, when we release, you know, when we drop inside, what is it then that kind of emerges? And I think that all of the ancient traditions had this. And in terms of our dreams, certainly in the Kemetic, the ancient Egyptian tradition, there was huge kind of dream chambers that people were, I mean, you still can, some of those are still there, that you would go into those chambers and just be in there for days, you know, just be able to really let go, release, drop down, and be present with something that I like to call more than. You know, something that is more than, and somehow giving it a name, and there's numerous names we could give it, but even giving a name kind of reduces it. And so it's been able to, I think, somehow be comfortable dropping into the unknown, you know, whether that is through our practices, like practices of yoga nidra, or whether it's through our dreams, whether it's through just taking alone time, quiet time, more meditative practices, and somehow allowing what it is that is emerging and unfolding within us and trying to speak to us and through us, really allowing that to have space. you know, we live in societies that tend not to do that. You know, I mean, nowadays, maybe it's slowed down a little bit, but generally, people are just too busy, you know, and we're asked to be busy all of the time and to be moving all of the time. And when we do that, we kind of negate and we lose that precious, really precious connection to what is more than.
Yeah. And in yoga practice, what do you feel is the most precious way to access that connection? Is it through yoga nidra? Is it through meditation? What would you say is the practice that
you want me to say yoga? You want me to say yoga?
Yeah, I would say that. I think that I'd love to hear your perspective in if we're really seeking to nourish a practice that is actually about fully enabling this connection with the more than. What do you feel?
I think it's an interesting question, because to be honest, I think we can do it in so many different ways. And for me, that is the beauty of yoga, because it offers so many different ways. You know, the tantric teachings alone offer so many different ways, you know, providing mantras and yantras and breathing practices and focal practices. There's so many different things. Some people will want to do that practice in total silence. I have a preference for that. Some other people will use a mantra or some music or some sound to, you know, to take us deeper. I think if anything, in answer to your question, I think what really facilitates it the most is not a particular practice. They're just the tools. They're just the kind of route that we take. What facilitates it the most, in my own opinion, is the repetition of whatever practice it is that you do. So it's that constant repetition of it. If you do it once or twice, yoga is, you know, really generous. So it will give you something if you do it just once or twice. But if you really have a consistent practice, that's when you're going to get the real gems.
That's a beautiful insight. Thank you. And I did ask you a little bit as a last question, is like, where do you see the future of yoga going? Because I mean, what I see now is we're getting a kind of crumbling and a calling to an account. That's partly what the movement is about. You know, it's calling to account some of the old teachings and the old ways of sharing things in these lineages. How do you see the future of yoga as a tool for freedom and justice emerging?
Well, that's a really great question. And I think we are really at a pivotal point. And I think one of the things that is striking for me at the moment is yoga studios closed across the world. So when I first came to yoga, well, a long time, 40 years ago or something, when I first came to yoga, there wasn't the studios. We didn't have the studios, and the emphasis was always on self-practice. So although you went to a yoga center or you went to the ashram, what you were doing was cultivating a daily practice. And I think what's happened with studios is we've kind of lost that in some way. And so what we've done is we rely on going to classes at the studio, and there's no real emphasis on home practice and self-practice. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist at all, or that some people don't kind of, you know, advise that or advocate that, but I'm saying there's been a kind of shift. So we have seen that shift. And I think now, with studios closing, albeit temporarily, I'm sure many studios will reopen, but I think it's still given us that time to really come back home to center and really start to cultivate a practice at home, so that we can start to resonate with some of the richness of yoga and the kind of beauty of yoga and the real gifts that yoga offers in terms of freedom and liberation from the kind of small self, if you like. So as much as I love studio, and I'm hoping mine opens, but as much as I love that, I have a real appreciation for the practice that one does on their own, in their own space, without wearing some fancy pants, but just really, really connecting to spirit.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you. It's a really beautiful thing to hear, and I really feel honored that you've been able to share this vision with us, and to see, I feel that you walk your talk. You've got 40 years of yoga practice in you, and I've always been inspired by the work that you've shared, and I feel that it's a really beautiful offering that you've shared with us today. And I encourage people to connect with your writings. What's the best way to connect with your writings, and what are your current projects that you might like to share?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way actually to contact me or be in contact with what I'm doing is my website, which is shola.co.uk. I'm always here on Facebook as well. On Facebook, I'm Shola Caroline Arewa. And I have a group as well for kind of helping people change and also lead the change, that's called Wellness Revolutionaries. Yeah, so there are places to find me. And one of the things that I'm doing, a more kind of recent thing, is called Enlightened Entrepreneurs, which is really for yoga teachers, coaches, so people who are taking this work kind of out in the world, people who I would say are kind of really helping to birth this new consciousness. And so Enlightened Entrepreneurs just really helps us get that balance of self-care, really developing the practices that we're sharing with others, and also that kind of balance of being in prosperity as well. So it kind of really looks at those two things. How can we really work from a place of integrity?
This is the challenge and the excitement, and I love this idea that we're birthing a new consciousness. We're taking these amazing ancient tools of yoga and letting them nourish the peoples of the world. So
absolutely, it's so important.
Yeah, so thank you so much for taking the time to share with us, and I'm really delighted to welcome you here, and thank you for the support that you've given to the Yoni Shakti, the movement group. And Shola's amongst one of the numbers of therapists who are really able to provide kind of support and understanding for people who are seeking to really, move yoga into a space of healing and justice and freedom, and to recover from some of the less valuable things that yoga's been used to do recently. So I'm going to say goodbye and thank you, and stop our recording here, and invite you to connect with Shola through her websites, and also with our campaign through YoniShaktiTheMovement.com, and through our Facebook group, which is an extraordinary place of support and exchange of all kinds of inspiring folk doing wonderful work with yoga. So I'm going to say goodbye and invite you to bid farewell to everybody. Shola, thank you.
Thank you so much, and definitely look forward to connecting with you more.
Thank you.